Okay, everybody, it's a pleasure to have you all here for our second webinar organized by RETE and the Leiden-Delft-Erasmus PortCityFutures research program. The topic of today's webinar is to look at the long-term history of port cities and their future in relation to COVID-19, which is what's keeping all of us at home right now. We do think that the challenges that we are living through right now, the lifestyle changes that have been induced by COVID-19, also give us a moment to pause and to think about what the future of port cities should be. There are many discussions of what the future of ports will and can be, but I think for our interest, it's important to relate that also what the future of port cities will be. So what is the future of the relation between the ports, the cities, and the hinterland? So in this context, let me first give the word for a brief greeting to Massimo Clemente as the scientific director of RETE, and then we'll go right into the presentations, keeping every presentation to 15 minutes, so that in the end, we will actually have some more time for discussion. And please do start putting any questions in the chat. I will try to look at it regularly and then bring them back into the conversation. Massimo.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. Good morning to many of you from Latin America. And a few words on behalf of the President Rino Brottomesso that couldn't be with us this afternoon. So you are welcome. And I want also to thank the PortCityFutures team for this organization joined with RETE. And so good work, and I'm here to listen all your interventions. Thank you.
And maybe one more word. We've also thought about doing a second version of this in Spanish. So if you're interested in this, maybe also put a note in the chat, and Fernando has offered to bring things together in that context. So we could have a repeat in a different language. So Vicent, could you please start, bring up your presentations?
Oh yes, thanks. I'm going to share the presentation. Is it okay for all of you?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Carola. Thanks, Massimo. Good afternoon and good morning for everybody. I like to thank also the opportunity to be here and to share and debate all the things that we are interested concerning ports and cities at the current situation. This is my summary presentation established in 7 points. And I would like to start with a general aspects concerning the current situation. It is a fact that COVID-19 disease has changed the everyday for people all over the world. The patterns of life, including working conditions, have been really disrupted. No? Self-isolation and lockdown and many of the established restrictions have changed our lives. The situation is new and absolutely exceptional, with new realities emerging. In fact, people have changed their consumption, travel and lifestyle patterns. The cities have stopped their activity, and consequently pollution has decreased. The points at that moment are, what does the future hold for us? Is the current pandemic different from earlier disruption? Or what would make it a major game changer? It is necessary to know about earlier disruptive situation and to compare them with current situation. For a few years now, the climate change and the need for energy transition for its mitigation has been one of the main issues. But what are we dealing with? In fact, we need different disruption definitions. As defined by, for instance, Merriam-Webster, disruption is a break or interruption in the normal course of continuation of some activity or process. Disruptions have a negative connotation as they are changes of the status quo, a break from the usual, at least a distraction, a deadly threat at worst. In some cases, disruption is perceived as creating opportunities, for instance, for the entrepreneurs. In the field of economics, on the other hand, many researchers who are critical to economic growth and wish for social advancement see disruption as essential. They argue that only by creating new technologies, products, and services that replace the old can we advance society and improve the human conditions. But there is also, in fact, opposition against the need for disruption. Let me show you this next picture. This is the change we have lived from the period before the crisis, the period in the lockdown, here in the middle, and what is expected to be in 2021 concerning the distribution of disposable income in different sectors that you can see at the left. Disruption is also absolutely necessary in many industries and human activities if we are to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. But the effects, the economic effects of the current situation are expected to be very high in all countries all over the world. We face, in fact, extraordinarily difficult circumstances with many people ill, shielding, or self-isolating. If I had to choose some key words, I would say that they are three at least: uncertainty, risk, and vulnerability. And in that order precisely. In fact, but this disruption that we are living is not the first we live in the last year. We can show a few minutes about different period, different aspects that made disruption in our lives in the last 20 years. What are the recent changes that we are living? We can live the globalization in the last 2 decades, with someone observed some negative connotation from economic point of view and an economic perspective, but in other cases, on the other hand, we have always opportunities, at least from new technologies, as we can still live in these weeks. In a nutshell, Friedman believes that the world to be flat due to these 10 factors: the Berlin Wall fall, the Netscape in stocks, the workflow software, the open sourcing, outsourcing, offshoring, supply chaining, insourcing, informing, and the asteroids. Many of these 10 items, as can be seen, are part of what is recently known as the disruption of technology. And in fact, we have a new convergence from some years ago. We had new gamers, we had a new playing field, and we had also new processes and collaboration patterns. And in some cases, it's opposed to the field that we live in the Berlin Wall fall with for example, the Twin Towers. There are two different moments in the recent history that has different effects on our lives. But what companies do in this situation? In fact, out of the clutter, find the simplicity. It's words from Einstein, and from discord, find harmony. And the companies, in fact, what they do is in the middle of the difficulties lie the opportunity to grow. This is the the present situation also. The COVID-19 sanitary crisis has broken, in fact, everything. Current situation is a really disruption. But the question, the point is, what kind of disruption is it? We have got restriction, national strategies against global approaches, for example, in the European Union, and mobility and air pollution has really decreased in our cities all over the world. What things are in fact properly working? Work from home, we know, supply channels, priority to medical supplies, postal services, international e-commerce, and so on. In any case, difficulties are greater for large cities, densely populated zones, and metropolitan areas. In large cities, for example, it's estimated that cycling could increase in the few months, in the next month, tenfold, and walking fivefold post-lockdown. Private car use will also increase in large cities, despite the fact that they are not equipped for it. Current and political dilemma is balancing health versus economy, reducing vulnerability of some social group to ensure protection them to health and economic point of view. Maritime transport has changed already in these weeks, and it's expected to be changed deeply. In fact, for example, as far as today news in the journalist daily briefing news, we can observe these main sentences to have the briefing of news. And always it's to have to underline the words, for example, survive, downdraft, the everything, shock, dilemma, it found the floor, drop 8%. Only one of this briefing has a positive aspect, talking about the innovation that is this catalyzed in shipping at this moment. And also the recent change in maritime transport has made some changes. For example, with some days ago, we can read this observation. The container lines divert 20 services via the Cape of Good Hope. Nothing expected in the last few weeks. But the most important is that to think about it, if it is important or not to provide a better relationship between urban and poor need. We can find different positions, at least these three that you can see here. There are people who is thinking that everything will be the same. Other people think that this is an opportunity to change, especially with the new technologies. And there are other people that could be in the country of what if land. I think this last position is quite the scenario most important, most attractive to be in it. What if land is, or what if it could be different solutions, different positions. Let me show you what is expected in Spain. Are changes in the port-city relations needed? Does exist any additional opportunity? In my opinion, currently the most important short, medium, and long-term effects are those that touch people, especially through unemployment. Inequalities grow in our societies and countries, and business destruction is a reality. Economic impact and employment are few. The recession will occur at various speeds in Europe. According to forecasts from European Commission, Mediterranean countries will experience a slower recovery than Poland, Austria, or Germany. Brussels foresee an unknown collapse of the economy since the Second World War in Europe. A decrease of 7.7 in 2020 20 is expected, and in Spain the prediction is that the crisis will be one of the deepest in the Eurozone. GDP, in fact, as you can see there in this picture, will fall by 9.4% in 2020 and will rebound to 7% in 2021, and the public deficit will soar to 10.1% this year. The unequal recovery is explained by the different rhythm of misconduct and the economic weight of tourism, which is this summer and probably the whole year and probably also the next year will operate under very hard restrictions. First of all, then, we need to recover employment and economic conditions. Protection and recovery must be ensured, thinking firstly of the most needy and in general of all. And political viruses must be avoided, demagogy, populism, and nationalism. And we need to identify strategic issues and work together. And the same is true to the case of port and cities. Let me show you now, in particular, what is happened, what is expected in Valencia. The most important dimensions of the metropolitan area and the Port of Valencia are territorial, environmental, and socioeconomic dimensions. Valencia City is the third Spanish city in population. Is the metropolitan area has an economic impact that represents the 11% of the Spanish GDP. Northern extension of the maritime works in Valencia finished in 2012, and many improvements have been made for environmental sustainability. Container terminals has made grown since 50 years ago, through 5 decades, the growth of the harbor, first with the southern extension, as you can see in these pictures, and finally with the northern extension that now you can see in the upper part of this picture. This is the global vision of the present of the Valencia port at this moment. In 2019, license for the operation of the new northern container terminal was announced. Valencia City Council objected as it wanted a new environmental assessment to be done. Coastal impact assessment was carried out and no new effects were established. And finally, an agreement was reached between port and city. In a recent research, you can see the total amount, the growth of the goods movement in the port and the position of the Port of Valencia as the leader in Spain. Here in Europe, we had a movement of goods that made in the container movement the 5th port in Europe and the 1st in Spain. We had also established some actions to increase the good movements. In fact, for example, in these 9 years since 2008, so from 2016, we had an increase of 24 in goods movements, and instead a decrease of 19 in carbon footprint, and a reduction nearly a third of the energetic intensity. It means the total energy amount per ton moved. In fact, we had at the Valencia port, that is composed of 2 ports, Valencia and Sagunto. It's a port system with a very real reality in the territory and from the socioeconomic point of view. In our recent research, as I said, environmental and socioeconomic impact of Valencia port has been evaluated, in particular, including the effects of the new northern terminal, both during construction and the operation that is expected in the next years. Valencia Port represents the 2.3% of socioeconomic impact in the region in income, added value, taxes, and jobs. Despite the fact that the Valencia Port is one of the most important in Europe and one of the first in Spain, Valencia Port and its nearest hinterland share problems of lack of both infrastructure and environmental. Environmental improvements, railway facilities, connectivity in city and port and logistic areas are needed. Much road and railways infrastructure improvement in the area are needed also. And also a commitment to the energy transition must be established. Different scenarios have been opened at present. Market difficulties are sure. Economic activity, and especially the tourism, as I said, will take time to recover. All the scenarios anticipate delays in recovering from activity. And ports can, in fact, ultimately reconfigure to capitalize on whatever patterns or trade eventually emerge, but that cannot be done overnight. In the meantime, Valencia Port and Valencia City must act apart from the needs of infrastructure that its summary is in this picture. The Valencia Port and Valencia City must act as facilitators, bringing together consortium actions with metropolitan area municipalities, regional government, maritime agents, business associations, collaboration with universities, and so on. And I think also circular economy practices should be favored. Collaborative city ports agreement should be established in the area of energy, waste management, etc., seeking joint solution, and of course, involve citizens. And then, to finish, I like to underline these 5 conclusions. First of all, I would like to underline the importance of the port system for Valencia area, all the metropolitan area and all the country, all the Spain. The socioeconomic and environmental effects of the northern container terminal are very important in the next years, but it is necessary also to improve all the facilities as well as the qualification of human resources to working there. Delays, in fact, are expected in all plans, and we expect also that Valencia City and Valencia Port goes together finally. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very inspiring conversation, talk, presentation. I think it gives us a good idea how cities and regions need to act as facilitators in anticipating the impact of COVID-19 on the longer term. So I think that's a very good start, and it's maybe also a very good introduction to the presentation that Esteban Ramos from the University of Georgia will be giving next, because it also raises questions about time. Stephen, maybe if Vicent stops sharing his screen, then Stephen, you may want to take over. And I suggest that we take questions at the end, or again, if you have questions and you want to share them in the chat, that would be. And I already see congratulations coming in from people towards Vicent. Stephen, are you there and ready?
I am. Can you see? Wait, hang on.
I think Vicent, can you stop your presentation? At least I still see Vicent's presentation. Yeah, I think now you should be able to. Perfect. I've got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Carola. Thank you to everyone for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. It's nice to see familiar faces. Muy buen día a todos y a todas. I'll speak in English, but if questions come in Spanish, or if we do it in another forum in Spanish, then that will be great. to follow up on Vicent's great presentation, I'm going to sort of flip it. So I'll do a bit of the empirical aspect, looking at the port of Savannah in Georgia here in the United States, and then thinking a little bit more abstractly about thinking about ports and the future, right? So an interesting way to start is this idea that any idea about the future should appear to be ridiculous, right? So I like this contradiction because it's speaking about actually any useful idea for the future should today appear to be ridiculous. And this, I think, is going to be the tension throughout this presentation of thinking about how to at once deal with the disruptions that Vicent pointed out, but thinking about contemporary scenario planning and forecasting as whether or not that's actually future craft or actually sort of more to do with a more extended present. So it's the thinking is going to be to try thinking about that and using the frame of post-normal times to look into that. Okay, so quickly, just some of the sections. We'll look at the Port of Savannah, then we'll look at some current trends, this proposition of a palimpsestic paradigms of security, climate, and health, that kind of analogy that Carola uses a lot in her work. Thoughts about time, right? Time is, of course, the currency of ports. Then thinking about post-normal times, the three tomorrows framework, sort of the understanding of a post-normal times future methodology, and then a kind of conclusions. So it's, of course, very difficult to say anything with certainty at these times, right? So just to sort of start out with my understanding of port cities, the wonderful quote by Frank Brosi, right? The use of port cities means that the economical, social, political, and cultural life of that city is predominantly determined by and has to be analyzed in light of that port function, right? So hopefully all in RETE are sympathetic with that understanding and that perspective, right? And this dialectical relationship between port and city, right? At the beginning, harbor made the trade, and soon the trade began to make the harbor, right? That beautiful saying by Sargent back in '38. So again, just to situate Savannah, we're here in the state of Georgia on the coast. It's actually where a third of the East Coast wetlands are located. It's a river port on the Savannah River, and it's a metropolitan port, right? So this just gives you an understanding of the ports along the East Coast of the United States and down into the Gulf of Mexico. And as I'm sure all engage and are aware with, the kind of competitiveness that happens with all these, with all the particular ports involved, right? So that competitiveness to do with the nearest interstate, which are the big highways here in the United States, or Class 1 railroad service. In that sense, Savannah has an advantage in that it has two Class 1 railroad services right on the grounds, which is one of the reasons for its great success. This, you can sort of see regional proximities. The port of Charleston, which is there in the north in South Carolina, is less than 100 miles away. So these two are definitely competitors. And this current situation certainly brings to mind the aspect of collaboration that we just Are other people? Okay, great. Just in the idea that should you have port failure in one area, the idea of logistics and needing to rectify that situation, but with nearby ports, brings in the idea of the necessary idea of collaboration that doesn't always come up when we think about national fiscal frameworks, and the idea of competition that's always quite rigid, right? So since the Panama Canal was enhanced, that competition though has grown quite strong, and in the Savannah River we're getting an expansion project and a deepening project of the harbor to go from 42 feet down to 48 feet, right? Down to approximately 12.5 meters to enable the post-Panamax ships to come in, but it's quite a shallow channel. So the dredging has to go approximately 15 kilometers out to sea because it's such a shallow approach channel. But as you can see, there's a wildlife refuge as well as an extensive wetland situation. So the tensions between ecology and economics quite palpable here, right, in that sense. But just to see, if you count Long Beach and Los Angeles, it's the 4th largest container port, but if you think of that as a cluster, the Los Angeles cluster, then it's the 3rd. It's the largest single terminal container facility in the United States. It gives you an idea of some of that, and 23 high-speed container cranes. So while the city of Savannah is quite small, no more than 500,000, the port has kind of an inflated protagonism within the United States context, certainly within the Southeast, having much to do with being the closest port to Atlanta, the metropolis of Atlanta, right? So then again, more looking at the port specifically, you see those environmental features, and again, how the concerns of sea level rise and economic activities and geotechnical activities like dredging, and the concern about ecological impacts in that. We also, of course, have the concern for climate and hurricane surges, storm surges. So much modeling has been done to see what kind of category storm, how that would impact ports. That'll get to a little bit later, the thoughts on how these varying paradigms of disruption, if we can use that word, are playing in, right? So you can see this is our own little Georgia Bosphorus, right? You have this sort of very much seeing these wonderful container ships going through the city. That building to the left is the City Hall, which is the tallest structure in the downtown. So that gives you some idea of what it looks like. And then this is the kind of logistics landscape that surrounds the Garden City Container Terminal, right? You have Lowe's, Pier Imports, Electronics, Home Depot, Walmart, et cetera, Heineken, IKEA. And so this, of course, all to do with warehousing and hinterland communication for logistics. And up until the disruption, it was one of the hottest industrial real estate markets in the country. So we'll see then how that plays out. But so as I sort of used in the beginning quote, I think there's the tension that we're beginning to see, are these ideas of path dependencies, right? How the past really does matter in some ways, how we're tethered to it, and how it shapes to some degree our way forward. But we also, I think what's happening in COVID thus far, it will be a kind of the acceleration or amplification of latent and slowly emergent trends that were perhaps even there before all of this happened. But that's still within the realm of something that can be predictable or calculated versus just complete uncertainties. And I think if anything, if there's any takeaway, I think that really needs to be embraced as a part of a port strategy, the fact that there really are uncertainties in going forward. And I think the Postnormal Times framework is an interesting one, right? So just thinking about the palimpsestic paradigm, it's palimpsest is a kind of a layering, if you can think of different layers sort of overlapping one another. And you can think of the associate infrastructures and policy dynamisms that followed. Of course, the security paradigm and after 9/11 in 2001, of course, impacted trade in the sense that security slowed down some of the fast-paced trade that otherwise had gone with an objective of a kind of a frictionless trade. The security paradigm is to put brakes on that a bit, right? These are sort of US specific in these hurricanes, Katrina, Sandy, Harvey, and Maria, but these two had large impacts on the associate ports of the areas where that struck. And certainly as a global challenge, climate will remain with us, right? The idea of climate change and sea level rise. And we of course need to attend them actively, as places like Europe are doing, I think much better than the US right now. And then we have this health challenge then with COVID-19, which in my thinking really is going to sort of be overlaid the other two paradigms in terms of infrastructures and policies. So in some ways, I think the health paradigm, we can begin to imagine, say, in airports, people's temperatures being taken in the same way that they're now checking security at certain points. And I think this perhaps too will be involved in, say, food processing through ports or other merchandise with some kind of scanning that will require some kind of health check as well. But again, I think that overlays into what is already a kind of a security paradigm that's there. So I think it's interesting or perhaps useful to think about this, again, within things that can be sort of predicted. I think that's useful. When I think about time, again, this is sort of, and it's the reason for the title is that the post-normal times, what we think about time, of course, related to trade, railroads originally in the 19th century were the reason for time standardization across time zones. And then take a big leap to the globalization that we heard about before and the timing of global supply chains, the just-in-time strategies. Of course, as I said earlier, time really is the currency of logistics, right? And one wonders now how perhaps time will time will be altered yet again. Perhaps there'll be a post-COVID-19 time. And I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like. But of course, you know, labor disruption and the fact that people are sick and not able to get to their jobs, or driver disruption and drivers not being able to get to the ports. These are all challenges that need to be thought through and in a sense timed, right? Because that will have its impact. But going ahead, oops, sorry about that. I think I present the framework, or one that I'm sort of thinking about a lot for this presentation, is this thinking about post-normal times, right? And there's a lot of text here, but just post-normal times are this in-between period where old orthodoxies are dying, new ones have yet to emerge, and nothing really makes sense. To have any notion of a viable future, we must grasp the significance of this period of transition, which is characterized by 3 C's: complexity, chaos, and contradiction. Right? So post-normal times demand that we get away from linearity and focus our attention on the interconnections amongst complexity, chaos, and contradiction. Moreover, all stories we tell about the futures ought to emphasize their dynamic and mind-bogglingly diverse nature, chaotic potential, contradictory possibility, and invoke imagination and creativity, right? So in places like port authorities and people who are responsible for the kinds of predictions that we saw in Vicent's PowerPoint presentation, say to 2021, to tell them that they need to be imaginative or creative is counterintuitive, right? And some people would be laughed out of that office. But at the same time, if we're honest with ourselves in terms of the kinds of complexities, contradictions, and chaos scenarios that we're facing, I think the post-normal times frame is an important one to embrace, right? Well, that's my proposition, right? So the Sadar and Sweeney, the references are at the end, suggest this idea of how do we predict a world when change itself will change, right? And so they present this idea of a 3 tomorrows of post-normal times, which have to somehow begin to open scenario planning to precisely those unknowns that as they occur, right? They call for something called a polylogue or conversation among many different disciplines to approach this. And I think this is one of the things that's happening in RETE now, right? Understanding how urbanists, even anthropologists, climate scientists, many different people can engage with port planning and policy. It's always been a heterogeneous discipline. It's one of the beauties of it, but I think that needs to continue in terms of going forward and embracing this challenge, what's sometimes called a wicked challenge of a polydisciplinary situation, right, in that sense. So this 3 tomorrows framework, we need to understand the present as dynamic, networked, complex, pluralistic, partly post-normal, all of which being introduced right at the beginning of our exploration of the future, as they say, right? So this idea of partly post-normal. The suggestion is over time, this post-normality is something that will grow, right? The unknowns themselves will grow. And in some ways, COVID-19 shows us that logistics are partially post-normal, but if we follow the logic, they will continue and increasingly be so. Which is an interesting way. So as a kind of conclusions, the way forward must be based on virtues of humility, modesty, accountability, the indispensable requirement of living with uncertainty, complexity, and ignorance, right? It's a hard thing for experts to do, to embrace that ignorance, but this suggests that that will be essential, right? I suppose within a larger context, this idea of the 3 E's that we've heard a lot about: equity, economy, and the environment. While it doesn't begin with an E, I think health is going to have to be a 4th component now, with the understanding that health absolutely has to do with environment, economy, and equity. So it's a kind of a 4th circle then to see how they're mutually constitutive, as we're all seeing, right? And I also think that if we go back to this idea of time, going forward, it's going to be a mix of fast and slow, nimble and responsive, more feedback loops throughout the global supply chain and across multiple legal and policy frameworks that will need to be better coordinated over time. So that's it for me. I look forward to the discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I think it was a nice add-on connection to what we discussed before, an important point to focus on equity, economy, and what was the last one, health, that you also added in there. So how does this actually then play out in a concrete setting? And I think this is the moment that we'll move over to what Fernando Puntigliano will be telling us about Montevideo, because we're raising a lot of abstract questions here, but they also need to be put back into the real world framing. And so that and I think it's important to make sure that we don't just continue, but that we do use this as an opportunity, as Vicent also said before. So thanks a lot, Stephen. And I hand it over to Fernando.
My microphone, I have to activate my microphone. I hope
yes, we can hear you.
Okay, oops, I started with a conclusion, sorry for that. Okay, first of all, I would like to introduce myself. I'm going to talk about the case of Montevideo, and I was president of the UN ports, and on the other hand, I was later what I would say Minister of Environment of the state of Montevideo, which is called in Spanish Director de Desarrollo Ambiental de Montevideo. That means I was working on both sides on the desks and of the desk. So before I was living in Germany and working on research and development, on shipbuilding, in aerospace. So when I came back, I took these 2 public positions, and this allows me to have a more integral view about the conflicts between port and city. And this is a little bit about the introduction. So what I prepared, I was preparing a table of content, and I have my engineering mind and very structured and linear from my times in Germany. So I decided to go out in this kind of interaction with architects and engineers and social people. So I prefer to show you, this is my table of content. It's the result of our discussion with Carola and Vicente and Stephen and Vicent, sorry, and Stephen and Massimo. And this is a little bit what you see here is the port of Montevideo, the city of Montevideo, the area of influence outside on the ring of Montevideo, what happens with the passengers, what happens with freight, what do we do with public health, what happens to the hinterland, and a little bit about climate change as well. Well, that means I'm going to address things about impact on passengers, bulk container operations. Sorry. So social impact, jumping of the city, winners and losers, dehumanization process, and some prospective scenarios regarding the future. So let me introduce you a little bit about Montevideo. As you see, the Montevideans were very proud of their port, very active. The port was part of the culture. Port, city, and country grew up together. The country was, Uruguay was an empty country, and the port was brought the momentum to the system, and all the infrastructure was serving radially to the port for the whole country. So there was a kind of cultural ownership of the port by the Montevideans. So it is in fact, an oversized port. What does it mean? It means it is a big port for a small country. And why is that? First of all, you need to understand that Montevideo is the southern city, capital of South America, a little bit southerly from Buenos Aires, and located at the River Plate. And somehow it was the gate to the heart of South America through the Paraná River and the Paraguay River. You have 3,440 kilometers of waterway without locks, crossing Argentina, crossing Paraguay, crossing Brazil, and also entering into Bolivia. That means this was the way to access the heart of South America, and still is an important waterway for trade. This year will be about 90 million tons running around this waterway. And all these ports, Montevideo, Buenos Aires, and some other ports like Nueva Palmira, even San Lorenzo, Rosario, are in principle a system that are the gate to the heart of South America. So what about the relationship between Montevideans and the water? Let me tell you, the city growth is associated to the waterfront. So the city of Montevideo started in this area and started to grow around the bay, and then along these lines and a little bit along the coast. So there was an important relationship, especially to the bay, in general to the water of the citizens, but a poor relationship to the watercourses, which is a special richness of the city. And later, when the ISPS code was applied and all this relationship was somehow broken, the city started to grow linearly along the coast. So the Montevideans, they love the relationship to the open sea, and this is the way that the city has been growing the last decades, and this is also a problem for infrastructure, for services, and so on. So the relationship between water and city is very important. The city of Montevideo had a very early sanitation system, and it is seen as a mode of citizenship construction. There is also an important social role of the beaches. That means plenty of people that make their holiday and they have some money, they can probably go to the east or go to other countries to spend their holidays. But the normal Montevidean, their opportunities of free time in summer is particularly the beach. So the beach needs to be clean, adequate for bath. And there was a port ownership by the citizens that was lost when the ISPS code was applied. All people in my age, they remember that one of the free time activities go to the port to see the ships and so on, and this activity does not exist anymore. You saw in the first pictures. So there is a new concept. It was developed by, particularly I would like to mention Marcelo Bednaric from the government of Montevideo in the area of planning. He's an architect. His vision is that Montevideo Bay can be the Grand Plaza of Montevideo. And for this, we need to have an adequate design that allows the port activities to be protected and done professionally, and at the same time have balconies to the bay to see the port activities and all the richness that this urban treasure has. So additionally to that aspect, there are a lot of climate change challenges foreseen already in the infrastructure plan in Montevideo. So there is a very interesting sanitation and urban drainage plan with an investment plan from this concept of construction of citizenship through the sanitation covers in 2020 93% of the population of Montevideo. In 2030, the plan is to get to 97%, and 2050 to get to 100%. This will cost about $1.7 billion. In the idea is the construction of a culture of water. So at the same time, there is in 2005 there was the largest port infrastructure program of Uruguayan history was launched, and all these are new infrastructure that have been developed since then, and there will be continue increasing infrastructure. So there is a port state policy because Uruguay is a logistics center of the region. There is a permanent growth of the port. And of course, as you see, the port is surrounded by the city, and this causes an important stress between port and city. So what is occurring in fact? How do we construct compatibility between the port activities and the city growth? So there were some ideas, say there is a limit of infrastructure that was negotiated between myself when I was president of the port and the former minister of environment of the country, not of the city of Montevideo. And so we said and agreed there is a limitation of port infrastructure, and these will be the limits that we will develop, and then the rest will be balconies to the bay. Then so the port activities can be seen, and this will be an enjoyable part. For this, there must be a recovery plan of the water courses streaming into the bay. So there are lots of activities that have been planned. This was big effort. This is the plan for development on this side. This is the plan for development on this side. And this place will be here, so you will see the dawn on the west. So this is what we're looking for. So this is why everything is okay, and everybody will ask, what about the coronavirus? This is the main thing. Let us see, the port activities are here, the city has growth, and there was no place for logistic activities, and there is like a surrounding ring where logistic and supply chain business has been developed. And so this part of the city, which were former winners of the port activity, are the first losers ring. They have lost this, and there is a kind of ISPS wall. So in fact, from the origin of the port, the Grand Plaza, there was a way where there was city and country development. There was an ISPS divorce, and port and city took their own ways instead of working together, and there was a port culture loss, and there was an attempt to convergency between port and city, and then at that time was an eruption of the coronavirus, and the question is what occurred later. So what are the possible scenarios in terms of construction and prospective construction of scenarios? One attitude can be the business as usual attitude. Another one that it can occur that will be an increasing gap between port and city. And there might be another scenario of port-city convergency. So we need to cross these scenarios of business as usual, increasing gap, and convergency with some crossing lines like the process of dehumanization, a new governance concept of port, the phenomenon of Industry 4.0, climate change, and the citizen port culture. So seen from these point of views, we can see that if we cross this concept in the matrix, we can say some positive aspects can be recognized, like there is an opportunity of new governance in terms in the scenario of port-city convergency. Industry 4.0 will impact in any case in Uruguay, something that you cannot avoid, and I think it is a good opportunity to do things, especially on the port-city convergency and the increase of port-city gap. It will occur anyway. So that means Industry 4.0 can be positive or negative for this relationship between port and city. Climate change is an opportunity because a lot of this infrastructure may affect the rain drainage of the city, and we have now the same quantity of rain, but concentrated in less time. That means that all the dimensioning of the drainage need to be reviewed, and there is opportunity of recover the port culture, like I could see in Hamburg. So, there are some yellow lights in the dehumanization process. I think will take anyway place, and I think COVID-19 will accelerate this process of dehumanization. So, and the Industry 4.0 will occur in any case in business as usual, and climate change issues will arise anyway. So everything else will be a red light. And this is that if we can influence these three scenarios, we will naturally prefer this port and city convergency. And what is the country influence? What is the proactivity required? So dehumanization, the country influence will be low, the new governance will be high. That means the country can influence positively this. Industry 4.0 will arise opportunities. So, but there were some things that Uruguay can influence and some not. And climate change, there can be a bunch of actions that can be applied and to prevent the negative effects of climate change. And there is a big opportunity to win again a port culture of the new generations of Montevideans that have lost this port culture. So as a type of conclusions, I would like to address city, local, and national authorities need to be proactive, and this will be determinant in how we handle the way out of the outbreak of the pandemic. The dehumanization process will be unavoidable, and I think the COVID-19 will accelerate this process. There will be an acceleration of implementation of high technology, and this should be used as an opportunity, because high technology can also assure us a better performance on port, a good relationship to the city in terms of utilizing a lot of technology that allows us to access to all port activities and so on. And there will be a business as usual, will be a high risk. If the authorities do not address this properly, I think we will enter in a process of increasing the gap between port and city and causing a lot of additional difficulties. So the question is, and this is something that the other speakers have already addressed, will be the pandemic disease the last disruption? There will be more disruptions. We need to be prepared for permanent changes. So I would like to finish with this, which is a rain drainage garden. As you see, it's a very normal quarter of Montevideo, a very normal neighborhood. This one of the several measures that are being taken actually for climate change. That means the water does not run directly through the rain drainage system, but it is first used in these gardens which are natural. So I will promise to close in 15 minutes, and I did it in 15 minutes and 13 seconds. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Lots of important and interesting ideas and connections. If I may just make one point to summarize what we've already been discussing, we see that the impact of these ports go way beyond the boundaries of their territories. We're talking already about a regional scale and trying to find those areas that are most important or affected. And we can probably take it even further towards the hinterland. Everything that happens on the sea will also have a much further down effect on the interior of a country. And with this, I would like to give the word to Roberto Rocco, my colleague from TU Delft, who will talk to us about the action plan for the Union for the Mediterranean. And then I'll chime in as time permits, before then Roberto acts as discussant. You are muted, Roberto.
I will speak very briefly, but my name is Roberto. I'm an associate professor of spatial planning and strategy at TU Delft. I'm new to RETE. This is the first time I participate in a meeting. My interest in ports is, of course, connected to a more general understanding of how ports connect to cities and so on. But I'm here to talk very briefly about the Union for the Mediterranean and the action plan that Carola, Ramon Roy, another colleague, and myself are working on. So in order to do that, I will share my screen. Just 1 second, please. I'll see if this works. I hope.
Now we're seeing your email, so that may
Yes.
not be what you said.
Oh, Carola, you will need to take over for a while. I have an emergency here right now. Can you speak for 5 minutes?
Yes, I will try to speak for 5 minutes, but I don't have your images. So let me do this. Okay, we will be stuck on Roberto's inbox, it seems, because I don't think I can take that away. But let me just give you a couple of ideas what the background of our conversation there is. So the Union for the Mediterranean has come together to develop an action plan connecting all the countries around the Mediterranean. And the idea behind that is that, well, you have a shared sea from which the global shipping, the impact influences the hinterland at in all its positions. So everything that you do is in this context interconnected. So the economic flows develop and push into the hinterland in the same time. Often the cities can also be in opposition, competition to each other. So if a port on one end offers different prices, different opportunities, the ships may just turn to a different port, and that also depends on the hinterland that they are located in. And obviously, many of these places have had a long historic development already together. I mean, the Mediterranean has served as the center of many of the long-term developments. And as a result, these developments have always been interconnected. So I would say that some of the borders that we've built since then, even the EU versus Africa and so on, are more artificial boundaries. So if we could rethink the connections between the ports, the cities, the regions around the Mediterranean, we might be able to solve also a number of other problems. So the Union for the Mediterranean has been in touch with TU Delft, and Roberto is the one pulling the project primarily. And we have been saying so the first basic step of these what is actually going on in these different countries, and then ideally putting it into sharing them. So once you understand how you can map, how you can measure, how you can understand one location, it makes it much more comparable with another location in the next country over. So we are looking, and I just say 3 axes, Roberto, and I was just introducing the 6 steps, but then you can maybe pick it up from there. So one idea in order to make an action plan for the Mediterranean was to go from the sea into the hinterland, so that we actually see, as we evaluate one location, to also understand what's happening in a different location. To give you an example, if we renovate the Algiers waterfront, that may attract people from different places of the country and result in the loss of population, for example, in the hinterland, or have what kind of effects. So we're looking for a means to measure along this line. We're also looking for a means to understand similar cities in their context. So can we evaluate where an Algiers stands, where Alexandria or Barcelona or Naples, so that we have some kind of measuring tool understanding how different cities around the Mediterranean or different places evolve, but also a way to understand how history, the longitudinal development, is shaping the future in these various places. So we've been thinking along these 3 axes, and we've been trying to develop an action plan where from similar assessment methods to gathering of information to developing projects in the end could be developed from this sea-based perspective. Roberto, do you want to take over from there?
Yes, I'm awfully sorry. I had a little emergency here, but it's solved now. These are things that happen when you are working from home. And, but okay, yeah, I heard a little of what Carola has said, and I just want to introduce, I'm sure you're familiar with the Union for the Mediterranean, an organization of 43 countries, all the European Union, plus the MENA region, North Africa and the Middle East, with a few exceptions. Syria, for example, is not participating, obviously. And this organization is now putting forward a very comprehensive action plan for sustainable urbanization around the Mediterranean. Of course, we know that the main objective of this plan is to bring the countries around the Mediterranean to a level of development and cooperation that is beneficial to all, but we know that there is a security concern from the European Union about the unsustainability of the economies around the Mediterranean and the huge movement of refugees and migrants that concerns the Union. The action plan Carola and I are working on is obviously nested into a number of other policy frameworks, which you can see on the screen. The Sustainable Development Goals, New Urban Agenda, the Leipzig Charter is being updated right now, and it's going to be launched next year, and so on. And there is an urban agenda for the Mediterranean, which is something that was prepared some time ago by the Union for the Mediterranean. And what this action plan obeys to very, very comprehensive, very big directives. It is science-led and evidence-based, so we do everything based on research, multi-sectoral and integrative. So we aim to bring together several sectors and integrate them in territorial governance. And we are seeking for participatory and inclusiveness of vulnerable voices and silent voices into urban development. Here I will make a small parenthesis to say that the port authorities would be, they're not a vulnerable voice, they're not silent, but they are still siloed. They are distant from many times from the administration of the city and from urban planning as a comprehensive endeavor. So what we have been seeing is that we have ports, we have cities, and they sometimes are, well, not communicating very well. Well, these are the actions that we are pursuing. So we have a few actions that relate to coordination and cohesion of planning in the region, educating and enhancing capacity, envisioning and governing together, which is about participation and the right to the city, the integration and protection of the region, especially now after COVID-19. It has become really clear that for example, in housing, things are going to change dramatically. A lot of the countries in the south of the Mediterranean have lots of problems with informal urbanization that is not up to standard of sanitation and so on. We have a plan for implementation and management, and we have a plan for monitoring and communication. All of this is not in order, but it's presented in this wheel of actions that are interactive, and that there is no beginning and end, but they are happening simultaneously. I'm going to skip this. This action plan is further developed into axes of intervention, which are nothing more than a detailed plan for spatial interventions connected to some specific areas of intervention. So we have one sub-action plan for housing and city expansion. This sub-action plan for housing is ready, and it is as long and as big as the main action plan. And then we have other areas of intervention that are not developed yet. And one of them, as you can see in the red highlighted, is the area of intervention that relates to port areas, port cities, and their hinterlands. So in this idea that that Carola was developing, that we want to see port regions as one cohesive, coherent whole in which cities and ports are working together towards some kind of a sustainable development, what would be the actions, the projects, and the policies that we could advance for the cities around the Mediterranean. So it's quite specific about the Mediterranean. But the reason I'm presenting this today here is to launch an appeal or an invitation for those who are interested to cooperate with the Union and with the European Union and with the Union for the Mediterranean to develop that part of the action plan, in which, well, we have a template for that. It follows a model of intervention, but it is nothing more than really writing a policy framework that will be then, well, hopefully approved by the countries around the Mediterranean and will guide policy in the years to come, we hope. It's quite a big endeavor. To give you an idea, the housing action plan has more than 50 pages. It's quite detailed, and although it has to keep to a level of generalization because it's aimed at so many different countries, but we are hoping that through RETE, we could develop that part of the plan. One of the things that we want to do is to organize that Carola wants to do is to organize this RETE meeting or a big conference at TU Delft. Well, those were our ideas before the pandemic, so we don't know how future conferences are going to happen, but we are hoping that still we can gather everyone and to discuss these topics. I'm going to stop here, and I hope there are questions and comments. And if not, you can always reach me at my email later on. Yo también hablo español, así que me pueden escribir en español y sin problema les contesto. All right?
Y también en el portugués.
Yeah, and also in Portuguese. Também em português.
Okay, thank you very much, Roberto. And maybe to add to your invitation to RETE's membership, we've also been discussing as part of the UFM the idea of making a MOOC, shared course, online course around the city of port cities, or the theme of port cities. Anybody interested in participating in that, please do let me know. I think it's too much to discuss here right now, but I'm happy to host another Zoom to dive further into that. So, and I hope you were all able to see Roberto's screen in the end. I don't see any negative moments there. We do have another 15 minutes left. So I would invite first Roberto to give a couple of comments on bringing it together as a discussant. And then we will turn to questions. For example, Saba touched back up on the question of path dependence, which might be one way to look into it. But I also invite everybody else to type up your notes or questions in the chat box, and then I'm happy to relay them to everybody else. Or you have to wave at me, give me a sign that you want to speak. Roberto.
I would invite anyone who wants to ask questions to please write them on the chat box so we can try to answer them. Well, as a discussant, I would like to ask our speakers to reflect on a few of the things that I already brought up. First, this connection between the objectives of the port and the objectives of the city, right? Here in the Netherlands, we have an extreme example of that with the Port of Rotterdam, which is moving away from the city physically, but also mentally. So the port is more and more distant. It is becoming completely automatized. So the workers have very little importance nowadays. And it's also leaving the city mentally. Could you please develop that and tell me what's going on in your cases? I don't know who wants to.
Maybe Fernando, you want to speak first? I see you, but you're muted.
Yes, I was muted. I think the case of Rotterdam is a very special case. I know the port. I have been when the expansions works were done, and I visited the port 2 times. And we live here in a very different reality. So this strong technological advance was seen from South America like something which was very far, and the business is running well, so there was no need to do important investment. I think this outbreak of the disease will cause to think differently, because a lot of things will be not seen anymore from the simple economic point of view. It's say the business runs well, I don't need to change anything. It will see that, okay, I have a team, I have a staff, I need to take care of health. I will be asked by the city. It was a question of image. So as I said in my presentation, I think the case of Rotterdam will be an example, or the Singapore case, or a lot of ports around the world. Or there are lots of advances of this type in Asia. Also in Hamburg, there is the Altenwerder terminal with practically no personnel. I think this change will be also a kind of outbreak. One thing you mentioned
will be what? Sorry, I missed that.
A kind of different outbreak. There will okay. There will be a different type of pressure on the operators to go ahead with this process of dehumanization. I think there is a kind of paradoxon that we need to address anyway. All the people say the ports need less people today, but they are expanding very strongly. So what increases reality is the productivity. The employment does not decrease. The tendency is to stabilize, not to decrease, but the profile of the employment changed radically. So the employment and the ports is very more high qualified and will be more high qualified in the future. So I think this will occur. There will be a health pressure, and this will occur in all the ports in the region. I think the first country to have this progressively advanced will be Chile, from my point of view, in South America. And then later maybe Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay and Peru will advance together. And one thing which is very interesting as well, which is not addressed in South America and the port conferences, is what happens with the waterway ports. This is a completely different reality. And this is something that needs to be addressed as well, because costs are very high and are not very efficient. And this will impact on commerce, and also this outbreak will change a lot of aspects. But I don't want to keep the board for me, because I can speak about this about 2 or 3 days, so I prefer to stop.
Well, if anyone else would like to comment, Vicent or Stefan?
Yes, I would like to underline that a very important thing, I think it's also the physical reality of the port and city. and related with the historical evolution of both city and the port. In fact, for example, in Spain, all the ports are artificial. There are not ports, at least one or two, in the rivers and the mouth of rivers. And all of the ports were constructed artificially since 2 centuries or 2.5 centuries. At least in particular in the Mediterranean, we have the cities separated inland because there were a security problems about the invasions and so on. And this is a main point to be considered in the reality of ports and cities. The growth of the both ports and cities in recent years has changed and evolved the situation, but it is the point that I'd like to underline. Another point is that the dehumanization. You are talking about that and talking about the automatization, and I think, for example, for instance, when I told before about the lack of human resources, I was thinking lack of education or training and management of the people. There are, in fact, many university programs, even in bachelor degree or in master programs that are concerned with the automatization and management, but there are some special lacks between different aspects in this kind of things, at least at present, at current situation also.
Stephen.
I think I was just going to say that Rotterdam becomes an interesting case study in this sense, just because of the degree of automation that it has. So certainly if we're talking about port-city relationships, the issue of labor, which is drawn from port regions, is key. And so if health becomes yet another risk management factor for port authorities, it's all the more motivation for capital to look to automation. But as both Vicent and Fernando were saying, job training can have something to do with it, but there's the simple fact that jobs will be lost as well. So that territorial reconfiguration as a result of automation is also something to consider, which is it's a tension, right? I mean, that's something to think about.
I think
Yes.
that's a very good point, because it speaks to some of the questions that have been popping up in the chat. So Saba Tsari was asking in particular, do you know of any specific coordination meetings held by port authorities and local governments to handle social and economic crisis that occur in these cities? So that was a specific question also to Vicente and Fernando, and also to Stephen. And Adelson Luis adds, there is in Brazil, more specifically in Santos, the largest port in Brazil, the port authority is federal, with no effective participation of cities in port planning. This condition generates conflicts in the port-city relationships. So again, what is the, can we have a quick round of answers first, Fernando, to hear what the other cities that have been presented do to relate port and cities to each other?
Yes. First of all, I would like to say that I was president of the port. We had regular meetings with neighbors organizations, in which we presented the plans of expansion. And in fact, this interaction, and also with the authorities of the city, we changed some projects, and we took into account the point of view of, as far as possible, the point of view of the neighbors and of the city, and negotiated with the investors to redesign the projects that were planned. It was not always possible, of course, but we put this effort on that. Then there was a kind of divorce, as I presented in my presentation, between city and port for years, and we made a big effort to reestablish the communication. It was not that easy, because there was a big pressure on large infrastructure development in the city. But at the end of the day, we could do, especially with the captain of the port, not so much with the port president, a kind of roadmap that was allowed us to go into a proper division of the Bay of Montevideo. The other point is that the ring around the port, which had the profit before of the port activities, they lose their profit, and in fact there was like a sandwich between the logistic area and the port activities, and in between there was different type of business, but there's some people who could not profit about the port. So I could address a lot of things like the profit, the benefits that can rise out of cruise vessels arriving to the port, and this moves the old city of Montevideo. But at the end of the day, this is not very good for the port itself. It's good for the country. So this kind of conflict and tensions, as Stephen and Vicent address, needs to be addressed in a proper agenda, in an ordered agenda, in order to bring this. But the absence of dialogue it's a disaster.
Thank you very much. Stephen, go ahead.
I'm sorry, that Santos was brought up by Adilson, and it's a fascinating example because of the participatory budgeting that was reached as a part of the planning process. So that kind of vision and understanding of what participation can be also raises certain expectations, and so which may not be as quick, something like a port authority may not be as quick to be able to implement, but they're saying that there's none at all. One hopes perhaps that RETE can be a group that brings together port authorities and constituencies to try to facilitate these kinds of dialogues. But the specific question of, do I know any conferences that are dealing particularly with this issue? I'm not aware of that, but maybe it's something that could be more on the RETE agenda.
But that's an excellent point, that RETE indeed could work towards making this bridge more visible, right? But Vicent, would you like to?
Yes, I'd like to also to underline that, for example, in Valencia and in all the Spanish ports, there are some relations between ports and cities in port planning, and less in the council of ports, because the municipality, the city council is present at the council, at the board of the port. I think it's quite interesting that Adilson told us in the chat concerning Santos Port Authority, but I think also, as far as I know, that in Santos there are some examples that some environmental corrections, for example, of effects on the beaches near the city and due to dredging operations. And it's, I think it's a good example also that the Fernando pointed out before concerning the neighbors and the association of neighbors concerning and consulted with the port planning.
Yeah, go on.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to be mindful of time here. We have 2 minutes left. So I would say, well, first of all, I would like to thank everybody for participating. Again, a reminder, we could have a Spanish version of this event that Fernando would organize. So let's think about that and how we could coordinate that. I also heard a lot of things that are really interesting, for example, for PortusPlus. So I do want to remind everybody that the next deadline for the open issue of PortusPlus is on May 31st. So if you have anything that you would like to write up and submit, and also, well, it's, as you all know, it's an interdisciplinary journal. It brings together professionals and academics. So the kind of conversations that we've been having and the attempts that we've been doing to bring this together would be are really important. I was supposed to miss So I don't know, Roberto Converti was going to say a couple of final words, but I think Roberto, are you still there? No, yes,
Me?
I don't know.
I
Okay.
am.
Oh,
Roberto,
great.
yes.
No, I was looking for Roberto. I was looking for Roberto Converti because he is going to host the next webinar in 2 weeks. And so I was thinking that he was going to make a remark of what is planned on June 1st, I believe. And if Roberto Converti doesn't speak up, sorry, then I might leave the last words to maybe to Massimo. I've unmuted Roberto, but I can't hear you. Anyway, so then I will let Massimo say the last words before I thank everybody.
Carola.
Go ahead.
Hi, Carola, maybe that Roberto is preparing the next webinar.
Yes, that's what I was just saying. So I had hoped that he would want to say a couple of words about it himself, but I don't know that he's coming in. Okay, with that, I would like to thank everybody. I think it has been a fabulous, fascinating discussion and really a start for other things to follow up on. If we can do a Spanish version, would be great. And I think hopefully this will allow us to build the bridges also between academia and practice. So on behalf of RETE and PortCityFutures, thanks a lot for everybody for attending and see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Be safe.
Bye.
Be safe, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.